Close your eyes for just 1 second. It is 2 o'clock in the morning. There is no moon, no light. Nothing but a thick, suffocating darkness pressing against you from every direction. You are floating in the North Atlantic Ocean. Water so cold it sits at -2 degrees Celsius. Your hands stopped working 5 minutes ago. Your legs feel like they belong to someone else. The blood inside your veins is beginning to freeze. And right there, just a few feet away from you, 1,500. Human beings are screaming. A husband is calling out for his wife somewhere in the darkness. A mother is holding her baby to her chest for the very last time as the ocean swallows them both. And then, slowly, one by one, those 1,500 screams begin to fade. Not because anyone was saved, but because the cold took them. Until finally, all that is left is silence. The kind of silence that will haunt you for the rest of your life. That right there, that is not a movie scene. That happened in real life. On one single night. Welcome to Dark Chapter. Titanic is not just the name of a ship. It is the name of a night in human history where mankind's greatest arrogance was swallowed whole by the ocean. Tonight, I am not going to give you the Hollywood romance. I am going to give you the raw, ugly, bone-chilling truth of what really happened on that ship. The truth that the history books skim over. The truth that the survivors never fully recovered from. And the truth that will shake you to your absolute core. Hold on to something, because we are about to go on a journey that 500 people never came back from. The date was April 10th, 1912. The port of Southampton, England, was electric with excitement. The White Star Line's crown jewel, the RMS, Titanic, was preparing for her very first voyage. And this was no ordinary ship. This was a floating 5-star city. The first-class cabins were fitted with crystal chandeliers, hand-carved oak panels, and the finest furnishings money could buy. The wealthiest people in the world were on board. Businessmen, socialites, millionaires, all of them dressed in their finest clothes, drinking the finest wine, living a life that most people could only dream about. Below them, deep in the lower decks, were thousands of third-class passengers, poor immigrants, working-class families, men and women who had scraped together every last penny they had for a single ticket. They were heading to America with one hope burning in their chests: a better life, a fresh start, a chance. The man in charge of it all was Captain Edward John Smith, 40 years of experience at sea, one of the most respected captains alive. This was meant to be his final voyage before retirement, his grand farewell. The ship carried around 900 crew members running day and night to serve the passengers. Every desire. 2,200 people in total were on board when the Titanic blew her horn, lifted her anchor, and began cutting through the open ocean toward New York. People on shore waved goodbye, laughing and cheering. Not a single one of them knew they were waving goodbye forever. This was not the start of a journey. It was the opening move of the deadliest game in Atlantic Ocean history. The first 4 days were like something out of a dream. Skies were clear, the ocean was generous, and life aboard the Titanic was intoxicating. In the first-class dining hall, the finest champagnes in the world were being poured. A live classical orchestra played every evening. Passengers talked about business deals, ambitions, and grand plans for the future. Locked safely inside the ship's vault was a priceless book, The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, its cover literally encrusted with real diamonds. Down on the lower decks, the third class, passengers were making their own joy, dancing, singing, laughing. These were people with little to their names, but everything to look forward to. The ship was moving at 22.5 knots, about 26 miles per hour, slicing through the water with effortless power. Captain Smith had one obsession: arrive ahead of schedule and set a new record. But by the night of April 14th, the ocean had a different plan entirely. There was no moon that night, just a cold, starlit sky hanging over an ocean that had gone dangerously, unnaturally still. Not a single wave, not a ripple, just a flat, glassy surface that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Sailors will tell you, when the sea goes that quiet, something is coming. The temperature had been dropping for hours, so cold that breathing the outside air felt like swallowing broken glass. And yet, the Titanic pressed on at full speed, because nobody believed anything could touch her. Inside those warm, glowing cabins, passengers felt safer than they had ever felt in their lives. They had no idea they were charging straight into the jaws of death. Then came 11:40 p.m., high up in the crow's nest, the lookout. Post at the top of the ship's mast, a man named Frederick Fleet was straining his eyes into the darkness. And then, in that solid black nothing, he saw something. A shadow. A white shape that was blocking out the stars. It wasn't a cloud. It was a wall of ice. A colossal iceberg, sitting directly in the Titanic's path like a mountain that had been waiting there specifically for this moment. Fleet's heart stopped. He grabbed the emergency phone and screamed the words that would end the world's greatest ship. Iceberg, right ahead. First Officer William Murdoch immediately ordered a hard turn to port and signaled the engine. Room to reverse thrust. But here is the brutal, heartbreaking reality. A 46,000-ton ship traveling at full speed cannot simply stop or turn on command. The laws of physics do not care about emergency orders. For 37 agonizing seconds, the officers on the bridge watched helplessly as that mountain of ice grew, larger and larger in front of them. And then the sound came, a deep, tearing, grinding shriek of metal being ripped open as the iceberg scraped along the ship's underbelly and carved it open like a blade. Up in the cabins, passengers barely felt it. A slight shudder, a vibration. Some people on deck actually laughed and picked up chunks of ice that had fallen from the berg, tossing them around like snowballs. They thought it was nothing. They had no idea the ocean was already inside their ship. Water was flooding into the boiler, rooms and cargo holds, with the force of a tsunami. The pressure was so immense that solid iron doors were buckling like paper. The ship's chief designer, Thomas Andrews, was rushed below deck. He had designed every single inch of the Titanic. He knew her better than anyone alive. And when he saw what was happening, when he saw those 5 flooded compartments, the color drained from his face. He pulled out a blueprint. He did the math. He walked back to Captain Smith, looked him dead in the eyes, and said the words that ended everything. "Captain, this ship is going to sink. The mathematics are against us. We have perhaps 1 hour, maybe 2. Captain Smith's face went white as a sheet. He had sailed the seas for 4 decades. He knew what this meant. He immediately ordered the wireless operators to begin broadcasting SOS signals into the cold night air. An eerie, creeping anxiety began spreading through the ship. Something was wrong, and people were starting to feel it. Hey, if this story has already reached into your chest and grabbed you, if you can feel the ice water and smell the fear, then smash that like button right now and subscribe to Dark Chapter. We dig into the darkest, most untold true stories on the planet. Stories that mainstream history glosses over. Drop your name and where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support is the reason we can keep bringing you stories this deep and this real. Now, back to the Titanic, where the most brutal 90 minutes in maritime history are just beginning. At 12:05 a.m., Captain Smith gave the order, lower the lifeboats. And this is where the story stops being about a shipwreck and starts being about human nature at its absolute worst, and occasionally, its absolute best. 2,200 people were on board. There were 20 lifeboats. Those 20 boats could carry a maximum of 1,178 people. Do that math. Over half the people on that ship were already condemned to die before the first lifeboat even hit the water. The designers had actually recommended more lifeboats during construction, but they were overruled because too many. Lifeboats would clutter the deck and ruin the ship's elegant look, aesthetics over human life. That decision alone killed over 1,000 people. On the upper decks, the women and children first rule was enforced, and it was devastating to watch. Husbands were being physically torn from their wives. Women were screaming, clinging to their husbands, refusing to let go because they absolutely knew, this was goodbye. And some lifeboats were being launched only half full. Crew members were so panicked, so disorganized, that boats designed to hold 65 people were being sent away with 20. Precious, empty seats sinking into the darkness while people above them were about to die. But the real horror was happening below decks. Down in the third-class section, iron gates had been locked shut, required by American immigration law to keep lower-class passengers separated. As water began flooding their section, these people, families, children, young men, who had given everything for a ticket, began screaming and throwing themselves against those iron gates. They begged, They pleaded. They clawed at the metal. Nobody came. The crew was too busy saving the wealthy passengers above. These people were left to drown behind locked gates, in the belly of a sinking ship, while the rich boarded lifeboats, just a few decks above their heads. That was not a tragedy. That was a crime. In the wireless room, a young operator named Jack Phillips was sending Morse code distress signals with the ferocity of a man who knew he was going to die, CQD, SOS, over and over. His hands were shaking. His eyes were burning, but he did not stop. He did not move from that chair, even as the water rose. The Titanic was firing distress rockets into the sky, bursts of white light, screaming into the darkness, begging for help. And here is one of the most gut-wrenching details of that entire night. A ship called the SS Californian was sitting just a few miles away. Her crew saw those rockets with their own eyes. They watched them burst against the night sky. And they actually decided that the Titanic's wealthy passengers must be throwing a party. They turned off their radio and went to sleep. If the Californian had responded, historians believe there may not have been a single death that night. Not one. Back on the Titanic, the bow was now visibly sinking into the ocean. Water was creeping across the forward deck. People were sliding on the tilting surface, grabbing railings, stumbling, falling. By 1 a.m. the stern, the rear of the ship, was beginning to lift into the air. People were running in every direction with nowhere to go. A Japanese passenger named Masabumi Hosono spotted an empty space in a lifeboat and jumped in to save his own life, a decision that would haunt him in Japan for the rest of his days, where he was branded a coward. Meanwhile, 3 of the first-class passengers, pet dogs, were smuggled out in blankets and saved, while human beings were left on deck to die. On the bridge, Captain Smith stood alone, silent. He had made his choice. He was going down with his ship. Thomas Andrews, the man who had built the Titanic with his own vision and his own hands, was found standing motionless in the first-class smoking room, staring at a painting on the wall. His life jacket was lying on the floor beside him. The ship he had created, his greatest achievement, was dying around him, and he had decided he would die with it too. 2:10 a.m. What happened next is something no Hollywood movie has ever fully captured. The Titanic's stern, all 46,000 tons of it, rose up out of the ocean like a skyscraper and stood nearly vertical against the night sky. The massive propellers, each the size of a house, were spinning uselessly in open air hundreds of feet above the water. People who were still clinging to the railings began to jump, but the drop was so far that many of them did not survive the impact with the water. At 2:15 a.m., every single light on the ship went out simultaneously. One instant, blazing light. The next, absolute total darkness. Nothing but the stars and the sound of metal tearing itself apart. And then at 2:17 a.m., a sound that the survivors would describe for the rest of their lives as the most terrifying thing they had ever heard. A crack, a boom, a roar of iron splitting under forces it was never designed to withstand. The Titanic broke in half, clean, right through the middle. People in the lifeboats covered their ears and screamed. The bow section plunged immediately into the depths. The stern, now completely detached, dropped back to the surface with a thunderous crash, paused for a moment as if catching its breath, and then at 2:20 a.m., it slid straight down into the black water and disappeared forever. The greatest ship ever built was gone in under 3 hours. And then the real nightmare began. 500 human beings were suddenly in the water. The temperature was -2 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, the cold does not just feel painful, it attacks your body like a physical assault. Your muscles seize, your lungs convulse, your heart begins to struggle. Hypothermia sets in within minutes. And yet, because they were wearing life jackets, these 1,500 people were not drowning. They were floating and screaming. The sound that rose from that ocean, 500 voices calling out at once, was described by survivors in the lifeboats as the most haunting, unbearable sound a human being can hear. Children calling for their parents, parents calling for their children, people praying, people singing, people begging the lifeboats just a few hundred yards away to come back. And the lifeboats did not come. They sat in the darkness with empty seats and listened, because the people inside them were terrified that desperate swimmers would capsize them. Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, the screaming faded, one voice at a time, until there was nothing. Just the faint sound of water moving and 1,500 people, suspended in the dark Atlantic by their life jackets, dead. The ships had not sunk them. The cold had taken them one by one. At around 4 a.m., the rescue ship RMS Carpathia arrived. When her captain looked out at the ocean, he could not process what he was seeing. The water was completely still, peaceful almost, except that the surface was covered with hundreds of frozen bodies, floating upright in their life jackets, hair stiff with ice, faces locked in their final expressions, clothes still perfectly arranged, as if they had just stepped outside for some air. The rescue crew wept openly. Some of them never fully recovered from what they saw. Of the 2,200 people who had boarded that ship with excitement and hope, only 705 survived. Now, here is where Dark Chapter goes deeper than the history books. Because when the investigations were done, several truths emerged that the White Star Line had buried as deep as the ship itself. Secret number 1, the missing binoculars. Frederick Fleet, the lookout who spotted the iceberg, had no binoculars in the crow's nest that night. Why? Because the key to the binocular locker had been left behind in the pocket of an officer who disembarked at Southampton before departure. One small key, one missing tool, but 500 lives gone. If Fleet had binoculars that night, he would have spotted the iceberg at least 30 seconds earlier, and 30 seconds at that speed would have been enough. Secret number 2, the Fata Morgana. On that specific night, the conditions in the North Atlantic created an atmospheric optical illusion, a mirroring effect that bent light and created a false horizon over the water. The iceberg was effectively hidden behind this illusion, and the SS Californian, the ship that ignored the distress rockets, may have failed to identify the Titanic correctly because this same mirage made her look like a much smaller vessel. Secret number 3, and the darkest one of all, the Olympic swap theory. There are serious researchers who have spent decades arguing that the ship that sank that night was not the Titanic. Their theory is that White Star Line secretly swapped the Titanic with her older, damaged sister ship, the RMS Olympic, repainted and renamed, so that the company could sink her deliberately and collect the massive insurance payout. This theory gained significant weight when it emerged that J.P. Morgan, one of the wealthiest men on Earth at the time, canceled his first class ticket just days before departure. Why would the most important financier of the whole venture suddenly decide not to sail? And one more truth that was suppressed before departure. There was already a fire burning in the ship's coal bunkers when she left Southampton, a serious fire that had been smoldering for days and had significantly weakened the structural steel at the very section where the iceberg would later hit. The company knew. They sailed anyway. These are the truths that the powerful men behind the Titanic wanted buried in the ocean forever. For 73 years, the wreck of the Titanic lay untouched in the darkness, 12,500 feet below the surface of the North Atlantic, deeper than the light can reach. Then on September 1st, 1985, it was finally found. When the cameras went down and the footage came back, scientists cried. The salt water had dissolved everything organic. The wood, the fabric, the bodies, but scattered across the ocean floor, still sitting in perfectly matched pairs, were hundreds of leather shoes. Shoes that had belonged to passengers. The leather had survived where nothing else had. And they sat there, in the sediment, the way they had, landed when their owners were taken by the cold, as if the people were still standing inside them. Those shoes are still there today. Witnesses who have descended in submarines to visit the wreck say the same thing every time. The weight of that place is indescribable. A pressure that is more than just water. A sadness that you can feel in your chest before you can see anything at all. As if 1,500 souls are still down there, in that freezing dark, waiting for someone to acknowledge what was done to them. The wreck is disappearing. Iron-eating bacteria are consuming the hull faster every decade. Within a few generations, there will be nothing left of the Titanic at all. But the lesson she left behind, that will not rust, that will not decay. Because the Titanic taught us something that no amount of human pride or technological confidence can erase. No matter how far we advance, no matter how tall we build, no matter how unsinkable we believe ourselves to be, Nature only needs one moment to remind us exactly how small we really are. So there it is, the real Titanic. Not the love story, not the movie. The raw, unfiltered, devastating truth of what happened on that ocean on the night of April 14th, 1912. Now I want to hear from you. After everything you just learned, the locked gates, the missing binoculars, the empty lifeboats, the Olympic swap theory, the fire that was already burning. Do you believe this was just a tragic accident? Or do you believe that the greed and arrogance of a handful of powerful men sent one of 500 innocent people to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean? Leave your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. If this video hit you, if it made you feel something, then like it, share it, and subscribe to Dark Chapter. We are here for the stories that the world forgot to tell, the chapters that were meant to stay dark. We'll see you in the next one.